Meet me on the softer side. Meet me on the softer side. Softer side of your heart.
Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books author reading series. You can find out about this and all of our other author events at www.skylightbooks.com, where you can also browse our inventory as well as order books online. You can also follow us on Twitter or even be our friend at facebook.com. If you'd like to talk to a real person, we can be reached at 323-660-1175. And don't forget, Skylight Books depends on listeners like you to help support us. So whether you're in our neighborhood or browsing online, buy a book or two to help ensure that we'll be around for a long, long time. Thanks and enjoy.
It'll all work out, don't worry. I was going to start out with a crass reference to Ode to Billy Joe. You know, it was the 3rd of June, another sleepy, dusty Delta day, because it is the 3rd of June. But I thought it might not go down any better than it actually did. So here are bits and pieces from the book. There is a psychological condition known as cartographic-obsessed, in which people see the whole world as nothing more than a series of maps. They look at clouds, rock formations, wallpaper patterns, the stains on a dirty floor, and they see there examples of intentional cartography. The puddle of blood looks like Africa. Every high-heeled boot resembles Italy. A woman's pubic triangle becomes the Mekong Delta before or after deforestation. Some say this is a form of pareidolia, a condition in which arbitrary pieces of information suddenly take on vast significance in the sufferer's mind. And this in itself may be considered a version of apophenia, seeing patterns and linkages in sets of essentially random data. Others say that cartographic-obsessed is just a fancy word made up by map obsessives to make themselves feel better about their own obsession. But perhaps you don't need to be a complete obsessive in order to feel the need for orientation, to long for a method by which we can chart our position in a universe of floating uncertainties. We read the map. We read the world. We read environments and faces and bodies. We hope to know where we are. Is that so entirely unreasonable? It was 6:30 on one of those long, restless city summer evenings, a time when Zach Webster could justifiably have closed up the store. Chances were there'd be no more customers today. There were few enough at the best of times. In fact, he could have opened and closed pretty much whenever he liked. Nobody was breathing down his neck. Ray McKinley, his boss, the owner of the business and of much else besides, prided himself on a hands-off management style. He trusted Zach, which was perhaps only to say that he was well aware of Zach's overdeveloped sense of responsibility. And since the sign on the door said that the opening hours were 10 in the morning till 7 in the evening, those were the hours that Zach kept. The store was named Utopiates, a name that by no means said it all. It was an oblique reference to an Oscar Wilde quotation. A map of the world that does not include Utopia is not worth even looking at, for it leaves out the one country at which humanity is always landing. But as Zach would tell anybody who'd listen, there are in fact a great many maps of Utopia, starting with the one in the 1516 edition of Thomas More's book, as well as any number of later engravings, woodcuts, prints, and so on. And that was the business Utopiates was in, selling cartographic antiques. Some were no more than decorative curiosities, but the best of them were rare, expensive, perhaps important, maybe even museum quality. It was a specialist market, and sometimes it seemed to Zach that it was too special by half. He didn't think Utopiates could keep going much longer. He was a single, poorly paid employee, but the takings were scarcely enough to cover his wages, and he felt that unless something dramatic happened, the end would come very soon indeed. Now he sat at his desk and stared out the window into the street. his gaze as idle as a gaze ever gets. And when he saw what looked like a bundle of rags moving along the sidewalk, he needed a moment to realize what he was looking at. Naturally, he knew the bundle wasn't moving under its own steam, that there must be somebody inside it. There was a small population of tattered street people in the area, but that didn't seem to be quite what he was looking at here. For one thing, these rags had obviously started out as fine fabrics. They were dirty and matted now, but they still had an air of ruined luxury. The bundle came to a halt, was still for a moment, and then began to rise. As the person inside stood up, a head emerged, a woman's head, the face young but not youthful. With long hair the color of wet newspaper, she might have been beautiful once, but not recently. Her eyes looked up at the Utopia sign and saw something hopeful there. She hugged the rags to herself and walked toward the store. Instinctively, Zach got up from his desk. His first thought was to block the entrance to keep out an undesirable. But he opened the door just a little so he could speak to the woman, tell her, with as much emphasis as was required, to keep on walking. But as he looked her in the eye, something small and compassionate stirred in him, and he felt he ought to do just a little more than that, maybe give her some money. The woman stared back at him, hesitantly, suspiciously, but then she detected something benign and trustworthy in his face, and said in a clotted, deliberate voice, "Would you help me? Can you?" Zach assumed she too was thinking about money, and he felt around in his pockets, only to discover that he had an insultingly small amount of change. The woman spoke again. "What is this place? Is it a clinic?" "No," he said, "it's a map store." She looked horribly disappointed, though not surprised, as though this was only the latest in an endless series of disappointments. In fact, there was an emergency room not too far away, and Zach was about to give her directions, but he never got that far. The rags were evidently held in place only because she clutched them to herself. The news that Utopia's wasn't a medical facility caused her to slacken her grip, and they fell all the way to the ground. Zach suddenly had a naked woman standing on his doorstep. She had a lean, pale body, grubby at the edges, the skin loose. But Zach hardly had time to take in the sight before the woman swiveled, turning her back on him. Her back looked less naked than the rest of her. It was marked with tattoos, wild lines and symbols that Zach first read as a meaningless accumulation of ink. And yet there was something compelling about it, something that suggested it wasn't entirely haphazard. He couldn't be sure, but he thought it might just possibly be a kind of wild, ramshackle map. But the glimpse was brief, and then the woman turned again to face him, quickly pulling the rags up over herself. She'd allowed him a glimpse of something precious, and that was as much as he was entitled to. Unsure of what he'd seen and why he'd been shown it, and to a large extent wishing he hadn't seen it at all, Zach stuttered that he could close up the store and take the woman to the emergency room if that was what she really wanted. She said nothing but shook her head. Zach had no idea what to do next. He feared the two of them might stay like that for the rest of the night, perhaps for all eternity without words or volition. But then he noticed a battered, metallic blue Cadillac parked a little way down the street. Maybe it had been there the whole time. Now it moved, traveling 100 yards or so, until it pulled up directly in front of the store. The driver, a man in a beat-up leather jacket, pushed open the two front doors of the car before he got out. Zach watched him move swiftly and determinedly toward the woman, place one hand firmly on her arm, the other on her waist, and push her inside the car. It wasn't violent, it wasn't even rough, but it seemed irresistible. Certainly the woman didn't resist. And once she was inside, the driver slammed the passenger door shut, then looked up for a second and caught sight of Zach staring at him. Zach turned away, avoided eye contact, pretended lamely that he was checking something in the window of the store. He didn't dare watch as the man got into the Cadillac and drove away. Zach remained in the doorway, poised among various kinds of uncertainty. The incident had been so brief, so self-contained. What had he actually seen? Was that really a map on the woman's back? Had she really been showing it to him? And if so, why? The mental image was already fading, and he felt that was probably no bad thing. And it was the guy in the car, the woman's keeper, boyfriend, kidnapper. He looked in the direction the car had gone, but well aware that there was nothing to see, no conclusion to be drawn. It was a little while before he realized someone was standing next to him. It was a woman of about his own age, tall, a little gawky, with something steely yet quizzical in her face. She was wearing thrift store clothes, and her big dark eyes looked out through ornate tortoise glasses. Something about the image didn't quite suit her, as if she was trying to appear more bookish and hipsterish than she really was. She straddled a bike that was either an old wreck or something very cool and retro. Zach couldn't tell which. "Did you just see what I just saw?" she said to Zach. "I'm not sure what I saw," Zach said, honestly enough. "Sure, but the woman and the stuff on her back, you saw that, right?" "Yeah," said Zach. How could he not have seen it? The woman looked at the window of the store with cool curiosity. "How long has this place been here?" "Quite a while." "Strange, I never even noticed it before." Zach didn't think that was all that strange. If you weren't interested in antique cartography, you'd have no reason to be aware of Utopia's existence. "Come on in if you like," he said. "Take a look around." He wasn't quite sure why he said that. She certainly didn't look like a potential customer, a fact that was confirmed when she took half a step forward toward the front door, hesitated, peered into the interior of the store, and gave a mild but distinct shudder. "No, I don't think so," she said. "This place of yours kind of gives me the creeps." As Zach watched her get on her bike and pedal away, he couldn't understand quite why he found her remark so painfully hurtful. Thank you. I'm not quite sure. I guess you asked.
I guess we share this mic.
Well, I guess we share. Can you hear us both?
Can you hear us if we do that? Yeah. We can hand it back and forth. Okay. All right. Hi, Geoff.
Hi.
I'm going to look up this passage on page 66. I think that you share some qualities with our man Zach. You share some interests with Zach.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And one in particular that I wanted to read. He is explaining himself to another character. He says, urban exploration, investigating the city, creative trespass, going where I'm supposed to, getting into abandoned structures, factories, closed down hospitals, derelict power stations, you know? This is what Zach likes to do in his spare time, and over the last few years, you've been doing a lot of writing about urban exploration, right? Mm-hmm. This novel is in some ways an outgrowth of that work?
Yeah, I mean, of course, in some ways, when I'm writing the book, I am all my characters all the time. You know, I mean, the murderers and the women and the children, and sometimes it's hard to distance yourself, to make sure that Zach's interests are sufficiently different from mine, and that's certainly a place where there's a bit of overlap. As you know, I'm a kind of manic pedestrian. One of the things I was very keen to do was make sure he wasn't quite as manic a pedestrian as I was, because it would have been possible to make him the guy who walked endlessly around the city. So I wanted to make that kind of gap between him and me. But as you probably know, there was a book of mine called Walking in Ruins, which, because this book just took forever to write and get edited and changed, to such an extent that I actually wrote another book, this nonfiction book called Walking in Ruins, at the same time. And of the two Venn diagrams, there is a strange overlap. You know, and I make no secret of the fact that I am Zach, to the extent that, you know, I'm fascinated by those strange alleyways and back alleys and forbidden zones and what he and I would call edgelands, the place where the city stops. And it may be It's not quite town, it's not quite country, it's not quite industrial. And sometimes these edgelands don't have to be on the edge. You know, you have a facade of a rich and expensive shopping area, and if you go the service street behind, you know, that's where the garbage and the broken masonry is. So to that extent, yes. I mean, I'm guilty as charged, I think, is a simple answer to that.
Yeah, so how many people have you killed? No, I would. You don't have to say that in public.
I was almost there with a smart answer. I was going to say, in my mind, many.
That's right.
Only in my mind.
Now, one of the interesting things I want to ask you at some point about fiction and nonfiction in a more general way, but in this particular case, was it odd to be writing in such detail about a city that, as far as it does not exist? Right? It's not. And I kept waiting to figure out where it was. I was a little intrigued by Hope in 10th, but I realized that would be Hope in Olympic, right? There's no Hope in 10th. It's Hope in 9th and Hope in 11th. But I kept wondering if there was a real model, and it seems like there isn't.
Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting because, as I say, it had a long gestation, this book, and it was shown to a lot of editors. Most of whom suggested I should be writing a completely different book.
It seems to be what editors do these days.
Yeah, and that quite a lot of them seem to be saying, well, one of them at least said I should be writing the Da Vinci Code, but set in London. And that seemed to, so there would be a treasure hunt in the sewers of London. And somebody somewhere probably should be writing that book, but not me, and not based on the manuscript that I sent him. A lot of people in the beginning seemed to assume that I was writing about a European city, and I don't. I mean, I think people read it and see the city, and they project their notion of a city onto it. It seemed to me that it was transparently an American city. I think if the character there hadn't been driving a Cadillac, if he'd been driving a Rolls Royce, that might have located it, or if he'd been driving a Fiat, that might have located it somewhere. I was very keen that it should take place although it's not a quote-unquote real city, and I think we could argue that all novels take place in unreal cities anyway, even if they're set in London or LA. But I didn't want it to take place nowhere. I didn't want it to be in some. I mean, one of the models I had for it was Springfield, The Simpsons, and when they need a revolving restaurant, there's a revolving restaurant there, and when they need a desert, there's a desert there right side of town, and so it had these features which are common to a lot of cities, but I guess I tried to avoid. I didn't. There's no Eiffel Tower. There's no River Thames. There is a subway system which perhaps resembles the LA system more than it does, say London, because people seem to be very suspicious about it in the book. People don't quite understand what this subway is for. So I mean, it's. I think of Italo Calvino and the Invisible City. I mean, he's kind of name checked in there. So I had the sense that I wanted it to be nowhere but everywhere. And I thought this was, as writers do, I thought this was a new and exciting idea. And my editor says they get one of those in, once a month. This novel set in a fantasy city, and that the trick is to make it seem real, even though it's unreal. But I guess that's the trick with writing any novel, setting it anywhere.
Right, which it does. Very real. There's a long series of meditations. You read a little bit towards the end about the nature of map love, and a long meditation about mapping and maps and what they mean, what they represent, how they represent. And I kept making notes to myself for nice, clever questions for you. One was going to be about the map and the territory, and then you said something about the map and the territory. I won't say that, right? So you kept upstaging my questions.
I was trying to cover my back
as we went along. But you wrote a piece for us a year and a half ago, or maybe even 2 years ago, about the miniature.
I did indeed.
You're right, and about miniatures in art, and one of the ideas that came in at the end of that essay was about the idea that a novel is always a miniature. It's always a kind of squeezing down. It's always a kind of representation. It's always a selection of various things that you're going to represent. And it feels like this is part of the same kind of meditation on the nature of representation.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't put it together in quite that way. I mean, I think it's true, and I think it is what I'm doing. That, you know, a map by definition, if it depicts the whole world, it's equivalent to the whole world. It's the same size, the one-to-one, yeah. And that all maps are partial, and all maps are, they have interests, they're never disinterested. Mm-hmm. The map is always made in somebody's interests, and it may not be yours, and it may not be mine. You know, it may be Google's, or it may be, you know, Bing. Mm-hmm. That the features that are shown on a map always have a meaning. There's no way. It's impossible. I mean, you can't have a simply neutral map. You know, it may be a driving map or a walking map or a real estate map. And in the same way, you can't have a map that covers the entire territory. You can't have a novel that covers the entire territory, because it would be, again, the equivalent of the world. It would be the same size and shape and right. Detail. So yeah, it is miniaturization, and I guess it's also about finding a slice or an area that it's a part for the whole. It has enough features and it has enough resonance that it tells you what you need to know about the place, the territory, the world. And I guess, I mean, that's what all art does, as well as what all map making does. I mean, another thing I would say about the map is that, again, I'm not quite Zach, but I don't collect maps, but I've always kind of accumulated them. You know, whenever I go somewhere, ever since I was a kid, it seemed that the map was the way to get to know a place, or the way to know a place. And I'm well aware that one of the recurrent themes, to the extent that, you know, any writer really grasps what he's writing about, it does seem to me that I'm always writing about the relationship between people and things. You know, historically I've written about Volkswagens and women's shoes and maps. Although they're objects, they refer to something beyond themselves. Mm-hmm. And within these women who appear in the book, who've got maps on them, that's a way of turning a person into a thing. That these women appear with the maps. They mean something. We don't know what. We don't know if they do mean anything. There's a lot of what's the word? Switch and bait and switch. That's right. Yeah. But I very much wanted it to be. I mean, there is a mystery. There is something to be solved. But I wanted it to be a real mystery and a real solution. You know, I didn't want to write a completely postmodern. You know, the mystery is there is no mystery. After you've plowed through 300 pages.
Do you have maps in your head too? Are you when you're out walking, or you're walking in relation to a map in your head?
Yeah, I mean, doesn't everybody?
No, as it turns out. Right? Yeah. No, my wife, when we moved to LA, she could not figure out how to get around, and I said, "Well, you read the map. You look at the map." And she said, "I don't know how to do that. I just know how. Just tell me to go down here, take a left at the third light, and take a right at the." That's how she got everywhere. Oh, right. But the kind of idea of an internalized map was foreign to her. She's now figured it out, but I mean, how to do that. But it didn't come naturally. It was not the way she looked at the world. And I just read a piece that talked about Manhattan and the subway map of Manhattan, kind of famous subway map. You know that the upper west side. The Upper West Side is directly north of the Lower East Side.
Right. No, I didn't.
Right. Yeah. But because the map is always presented as if Manhattan is actually straight up and down, we think of it as straight north, and so we've all got this bad map in our head, right?
Yeah.
Of Manhattan, because Manhattan is actually on an angle.
Yeah, and and in London. I have both an internalized map of London and an internalized map of the Tube. the tube system, and it is an incredibly elegant map of the tube system. But it bears a very scant relationship to the world above, and sometimes it will appear that you're going quite a long distance on the map, but you're only going a very short distance on the tube, and vice versa. That there are two territories that are sort of superimposed. And certainly when I first lived in London, I would take a tube, to go 200 yards, and then realize what a fool I'd been.
And vice versa. I've gotten off the subway because it would look like it was a short walk, and 3 miles later. You write nonfiction, you write fiction. Do you ever find yourself slipping into fiction while you're writing your nonfiction and having to kind of rein yourself back in, or do you not rein yourself back in and just let it go?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to rein yourself in somewhat, I think. But again,
how much do you lie, I guess I'm saying?
Well, I mean, as much as necessary, I don't want to sort of make out that all my books are absolute torture to write or to read, but the book before, The Lost Art of Walking, that had a long inception. I mean, largely because it was not a question of what you put in, it was a question of what you left out.
Yeah.
And it seemed that it was, I wasn't writing the encyclopedia of walking, I was writing a book. And, it was like a bag full of stones, and, there were lumps and bumps. And, it's always about organization, it's always about making a shape and a structure. But certainly at one point, when it was going all over the place, and I didn't know where it was going, it did occur to me, well, the solution to this is to say it's a novel, and it's a book about a man who's writing a book about walking, and so that my struggles become his struggles, and and then he finds love on page 273. But I resisted that finally. But yeah, I mean, we all lie. And the ones who, the difference is some of us admit it and some people don't, and some readers admit it and some readers don't want to admit it.
Yeah, well, is the selection process itself a form of lying about reality?
Well, I think it's the same as the map. The map can't list every feature, so the moment you start selecting, you are, in a sense, I don't think you're falsifying, but you are reshaping. You're making if it's personal, if it's a memoir, you're reshaping it in your own image of what you want your own image to be, in the sense that, if everybody in this room drew a map of their LA, they'd all be different, but they might be to greater or lesser extent inaccurate, but they wouldn't be lies.
No. Yeah. They'd all be between the 10 and the hills.
And there'd be this great gouge down the map, which would be the 405.
The other form of mapping that's in the book are tattoos, right? I mean, literally in some cases, but in general, the tattoo is a representation of reality as well, right? And often, or representation, I guess, of dragons and irrealities of various kinds. But they're representational, and in some cases in your book, there are people who have tattoos of maps. So you're thinking about the tattoo as a form of representation as well?
As a form of representation, but I think also as a form of scarring, as a form of marking. In the new John Waters book, Cartographic, there's a lot of fantasy sequences, and there's one bit where he runs off and joins a carnival, and he's displayed as the last man in America without a tattoo. And I somehow feel that sometimes I think that's going to be me, or
that was my next question. So you don't have any?
Look, I've been thinking about getting a tattoo for 40 years, and I haven't come to a conclusion. So I guess it's kind of too late. My big idea was to have not maps, but I would have a series of circles on both arms, and then everywhere I went in the world, I would find a tattooist to do a skull in each I mean, any kind of tattooist, however rubbish they are, they can generally do a skull. So you'd finish up with skulls of the world, but but it seems like, but again, it seems like more of a literary conceit than an actual thing I'd want to do.
Yeah, well, and that would take a little bit of time to get that done.
Yeah, I mean, it would be. I'm not afraid of commitment, Tom.
Yeah. So, why do you write? Seriously.
No, I mean, seriously, I don't know. I think I know why I started writing. I think it was, I mean, I think everyone who writes says, it's all about, hey, look at me. Mm-hmm. And I think it's sometimes about, hey, look at me and love me. Mm-hmm. And I think you grow out of that very quickly if you're serious about it, because people don't. I mean, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. I mean, it's a tough question, and I'll give you a better answer tomorrow when this is all over. But I mean, as a way of sort of relating to the world and experiencing the world and describing the world and understanding the world. That writing does it for me, and reading as well, in a way that, much as I like photography, much as I like film, they don't seem to help me understand the world in quite the way reading and writing does. I think in a nutshell, that's, not in a nutshell, but in two sentences.
And for me, there's also, I mean, I feel like I'm part of something. I'm part of of writing as a I don't want to say it's part of a community, because I never met any of these people I'm thinking about when I think about writing, or very, I've met some, but I feel like it's somehow I'm part of something larger than the writing that I'm doing. Is that part of it for you at all?
Yeah, you're part of something larger, but at the same time, there is this very direct connection. I mean, it's not direct that I'm in direct communication with James Joyce, but when he wrote that, he was alone at a desk, and when I read it, I'm alone in a chair, and he's not there, but he was there when he wrote it. I mean, it's absence and presence, those French guys. But it is that. I mean, I'm in awe of stand-up comedians. I mean, it seems to me that's, if not a skill, at least a high wire act. I mean, a risk that I couldn't begin to imagine. But that sort of talking to an audience, whether it's a one-on-one or a group, that seems to me the most admirable thing. And when they're expecting you to be funny and when they're heckling you, that seems to be unthinkable to me.
Yeah.
But
it would throw me off my game. Yeah.
But at least if you're kind of when you're writing, you're not getting heckled at the time. You may get heckled subsequently, but.
And this is a very polite audience. Nobody's heckling us here, which is nice.
Right.
Speaking of which, should we open it up?
Sure, by all means.
Yeah. I'll let you go ahead and.
Okay.
Because the questions.
I mean, I think we'll be able to hear questions from the floor. Yeah.
So the heckling, does it make you a better writer, or what is the heckling?
No, I mean, for me, there is no heckling. No, I was saying.
But eventually, someone will be heckling you. There's a critic somewhere.
There's a critic somewhere. Yeah. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
So what's that age? Is it a heckler?
No, it's more like it feels more like a school bully. Actually, it feels, that bullies know what you care about and they know what you love, and they know how to get to you. I almost don't read my reviews. I kind of scan them, and I only remember the bad ones, of course. Have I ever had a review that has done me any good? Have I ever had a review that I've really kind of listened to? I'm guessing not. To be honest. I mean, individuals, friends, people who've communicated with me and say, this bit could be better, or this bit doesn't work for me. I listen to that, but in the end, I don't know. No, I mean, it's a lonely life. I listen to my editor, but you can get as many opinions as you can people, and in the end, you stay. You keep your head down, and and hope that someone at the end of at the end of the tunnel, you come up with something that people are, something that you're not ashamed of, and that other people will like.
Okay, let me take that one step further. So if you read an essay, are you reading a bully, or what are you reading?
An essay about me.
Just, I think, I see criticism as the art of the essay. That's what I think criticism at its best, what it is. Because I appreciate criticism, and I appreciate historically good critics that have been in separate, non-fictional worlds writing about, what goes on in art clubs. And some of it's really good, in my experience. And so I'm just wondering, maybe you think something...
No, I read essays as well. I'm thinking...
and you write them.
And I write them indeed. I don't think I've given anybody... I write essays and I occasionally write book reviews. It's I can't remember when I last gave anybody a bad review. I think you start out kind of thinking you've got a sword and you're going to denounce people who are, who you think are not good. And I think as you get a bit older, you think just the agony of writing is so, it's difficult enough without having some guy writing for the LA Times telling you you've done it all wrong. I'm trying to think. The big takedown of Woody Allen, is that Joan Didion or is that Renata Adler? I think it's Joan Didion. But that's a bit of bullying. That really is taking Woody Allen behind the bike shed and giving him a kicking, I think. And the fact that I vaguely agree with it is neither here nor there. But we all want essays and criticism to be constructive, but I'm not sure that they always are. I don't have a complete answer for you. Is the obvious answer.
How much self-heckling do you do?
That's a good question. That's a good question. There certainly comes a point when I've written something and I try to read it not as me. It's not about sort of trying to be not about being my worst reader or trying to find fault, but about stepping outside and thinking what would. When I'm reading something I've written, I'm not quite sure who I am. I'm not my ideal reader, but neither am I the bully critic either. I guess I try to be a kind of common reader.
Are you writing it for yourself, and you have to step back and try to?
I guess one question is if as a reader I discovered these books by Geoff Nicholson, would I like them? And I suppose the answer is basically yes. Do I sometimes wish you do it a little differently? Certainly as the years go by, you do. I actually find that works both ways, that occasionally and very unwillingly I read books that I wrote 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And there are two things that kind of happen. One is there is that, I just want to change everything. I want to, why did I put that word there? And but then other times you think, oh yeah, this guy wasn't so bad. He was, he wasn't so bad. But yeah, that business of trying to get outside of yourself when you write, I'm sure it's.
Do you do it a lot, or you try not to?
I think I do it probably a lot. I probably do it a lot. Yeah.
You've 16 books.
Oh no. 21 with this. 16 novels. Yeah.
16 novels.
I'm very, very old.
Does it get easier? After
No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. I'd say absolutely the opposite. No, in the beginning, I fairly literally didn't know what I was doing, and so it's like the first album. The people are uninhibited and they're just prepared to try anything, and it either works or it doesn't. And then the second and the third, and then at some point you start taking yourself seriously and thinking, I've done that in that book, and I've done this in this book, and it's time to do something different. And I mean, part of it, this question of where ideas come from, which people get asked, I always think that ideas are not that difficult. I think, a smart group of people like us could come up with some ideas for books. The problem is just finding that spark or that energy to make that push that says, it's not just an idea, it's something that I can shape into a novel. I can take this material and make it mine. So no, it doesn't get any easier at all. And this one was an absolute nightmare.
And why? What was it that was so difficult about this?
I think what was so difficult about this one, it's partly what I was saying earlier about not wanting it to be postmodern, that, it's a literary thriller. And I'm pretty happy with the literature. I find the literature easy. And one of the things I found out in a previous book of mine called Bleeding London is that if you have a real plot, a sort of A follows B follows C, and with a mystery and some kind of resolution, you can hang all kind of weird stuff on it. So that's what I was doing with the maps and the tattoos and the women and what was going on and why was it going on. So that allowed me the scope to put the weirdness about mapping and territory onto it. But at the same time, it had to be a real problem, a real solution, a real question and a real answer. And that was hard. You think you've got the idea, and then, in your heart of hearts, it's not quite working. So you take it along to your editor, and she says she agrees with you. And so then you kind of, you think you'll throw lots of backstory onto it. We'll explain everything. And that, so it gets more and more convoluted, so that doesn't work. So then you think, well, now I'll make it really simple, but then if you make it too simple, you haven't got the thing itself. So it was about finding the balance between, the through plot and the literature, for want of a better word.
Well,
Yeah.
So what, as far as formal notions like that, what pleases you about form, and what forms do you feel lend themselves to more integrity?
I don't know. I think the integrity comes from the writing and the sensibility rather than from the form itself. If I understand your question.
The more you're talking, I'm thinking, an essay does bully, and so I wanted to be more open to your thinking in terms of maybe formally structure counts, and maybe certain structures lend themselves to locating your questions and the answers with more ease and more grace.
For instance, this book, it starts off, and I think it's going to be like an Elmore Leonard or like a Carl Hiaasen novel, where you have one perspective from one set of your characters, then you have the second chapters from a different perspective from a different subset of the character, third, and what Hiaasen would do is just go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, until the last 3 chapters, where each chapter would have 1, 2, 3 within them. Right, and it would kind of march along like that, and you kind of you go back and forth between these perspectives, but then you just add some extra ones in. You go, you move them around. You sometimes double them up. You're playing with what's the standard thriller structure.
Yeah, I can't give. It's certainly not. I couldn't draw you a plan of that structure that you're describing. Which is only to say that I did what felt natural at the time. There is quite a long section at the end where we have a flashback with one of the characters, which explains him, but then there are small flashbacks throughout the novel. But it's you do what feels right at the time. It felt organic rather than imposing a 1, 2, 3 structure, which is kind of something like musical. It doesn't have to be 2 verses and a chorus. It can be the chorus and then 3 verses and then a different chorus, if that's a meaningful analogy.
And Can I ask one question about the thing that you did? For
Well, can I do that? Can I put that up there?
Yeah. The thing is, writing, as you suggested, is a lonely thing. You sit at your desk by yourself, and the walking that you do tends to be solo walking.
Tends to be, not always, but yeah.
So what was it like to take this kind of thing that you do as a writer and a walker, and have a camera crew following you around and Anthony asking you questions?
Well, you know, when I was really young, when I was like 12 or 13, this was the kind of the golden age of English TV, and I'm not sure if you got all of them over in this country, but certainly there'd be Alan Wicker and Alistair Cook, and then there was Kenneth Clark, who did the history of civilization, and they were always kind of, you know, wandering around, pointing and pontificating about art and culture and civilization. And when I was a really young kid, that was one of my, you know, my small fantasies. You know, that I would. There was a camera crew following me the whole time, and you know, Palladian columns. And of course, you know, right? I mean, the nightmare or the difficulty. You know, is seeing yourself. I've just about got used to the sound. I mean, I don't love the sound of my own voice, but I know what it sounds like. But seeing yourself from behind and the side and from angles that you never see normally, that's a really tough bit. I mean, the process of doing it was just fine. The results were the hard bit to live with.
I guess I was wondering if it just kind of ruined the actual walk.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was faked. Yeah, it was fake. You know, stand on this corner and talk and point. But, I mean, it felt far more natural by the end of it. I mean, it took an afternoon. Yeah, it was feeling far more natural by the end than it did at the beginning. And I guess, you know, Jonathan Meades has been doing this for 20 years. He's fairly sanguine about yeah.
Other questions?
Yes, sir.
As you read that very generous excerpt from your novel, I got the distinct impression that it was set in London. It could be because of the accent.
It might.
I even think, I don't know if you wrote this, I heard the tinkling of the bells as you opened.
Well, in fact, I mean, I was reading a shortened version of the passage, and yeah, I actually do describe. Yeah, you're that's very shrewd, actually. That's really good, because I can picture the street, and I could take you to the street, and that is in London, and it's somewhere by Baker Street, and of course I can't remember my own words, but there was I described the other businesses in the row of stores, and one is a French horn maker, and one's a wedding dress store. And I would have to take you back to sort of 1985, but if I could do that, I could take you to this street in London, and that's what was going on there. So, yeah, guilty on that one, I'm afraid. Thank you.
I noticed that as well, but the way she spoke seemed very American.
Oh.
So the actual words. So I did.
Well, I'm delighted to hear it. I mean, you know,
yeah.
I
Which is good. It's kind of marrying the London feel with LA or New York or anywhere, some major cities.
Well, I think we can get informal now.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget that you can check out this and all of our other great podcasts at www.skylightbooks.com. Today's music was provided by Fragile Gang. You can check them out at MySpace, Facebook, and the iTunes Music Store. Thanks for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.